spoke to a few members of the scientific committee, and no better person can we pick than Corinne Clément, who will tell us about the future.
Okay, thanks a lot for this very nice invitation, and maybe I have a new fellow or postdoc in the lab, so that's good. Okay, so I'm going to discuss with you, and probably we'll have also questions, and I guess the title is a little bit provocative. So new limits for treating obesity, insight for the microbiome. And as you may know, there is actually a burst in the publication now in this field. And I will try to basically come back to patients and what can we learn and what can be the future for microbiome-based therapy in metabolic disease, but I will also focus on obesity. So I think there's no need to this audience just to recall the importance of cardiometabolic disorders. You all know that, and you know also that overweight, obesity is a key factor. And actually, it was well discussed by WHO that actually obesity is a disease. So you may know that also in these last years, I would say last 20 years, there has been a huge progress in the understanding of mechanism leading to the development of obesity, and especially first at the tissue level, and second at the crosstalk between tissue. So basically, when you gain weight, there are many perturbations in the adipose tissue with increased fat cell size, hypertrophy. This is associated with many perturbations of endocrine secretion, immune inflammatory factor imbalance, altered angiogenesis. There are many discussions about organelle dysfunction as well as altered extracellular matrix. So the adipose tissue is key, and this is associated with perturbation of the dialogue between adipose tissue and other systems in the body, such as, of course, the brain, the muscle, the heart, and by the way, again, as you may know, the fat around the heart is also very important for cardiovascular function, vascular system atherosclerosis, liver injury, and so on. And actually, when you look at that, you might say, well, there is an important organ which is missing. And this is to some extent a paradox, because for many years we have been focusing on so-called metabolic organs, such as, of course, the brain, the adipose tissue, and the muscle. And to some extent, even as a nutritionist, we forgot the intestine system, the digestive tract. And basically, if you feel a little bit alone, you can tell yourself, well, you are not alone, because in your body, you have more than 100,000 billion bacteria in your body. So, and what we've learned is that there is a constant dialogue between this bacterial system and our body. And this is key because it's also an interface between our lifestyle and our host body. So, well, obesity can be seen as a complex disorder or complex organ and systemic disorders. And as in many other chronic diseases, such as cardiovascular disease, cancer, and others, there has been many discussions about genetic factors to try to understand the complexity of obesity, and I'll come back on that in a minute. So, and basically, the technologies to screen our genome has been applied to the study of the metagenome, which is the collective genome in our gut bacteria. And again, I will come back on that. Just to illustrate, because this is important for also the talk, the fact that, coming back to the tissue. Again, inflammation is key, and as I told you, when you gain weight, you increase adipose cell size, leading to hypertrophy, and these cells become pro-inflammatory. You have accumulation of inflammatory cells, and what you can see here is very characteristic, very typical of an obese adipose tissue where you see the adipocytes, but also macrophages around the cells that perturb a lot the biology of the tissue. And there are many changes also in the immune systems. You can see lymphocytes here and mast cells. And again, as in other organs, when obesity becomes chronic and you have a pro-inflammatory condition, you will have accumulation of extracellular matrix. And for example, our team showed that indeed there is also accumulation of fibrosis in the adipose tissue. That again will perturb the biology of the adipose tissue. And recently we identified some progenitor cells that actually may contribute to fibrosis development. So why I'm telling you that? Because when we speak about the gut microbiota, there is a discussion about some factors, some gut-derived factors that could contribute actually to a pro-inflammatory condition in obese subjects. So inflammation is key. It's key in the adipose tissue, but it's also key in the intestine layer. So, and this is a study we had the opportunity to do with colleagues in Paris. And basically, we took this model of bariatric surgery patient, and especially gastric bypass, where we had access to this jejunum part that basically the surgeon threw away, right? So we got the intestine. And what we did was to establish the profile, comparing actually non-obese to obese individuals. We had the opportunity also to study non-obese individuals and to see that we had accumulation of inflammatory cells, both innate immune cells as well as adaptive immune cells. And what was very characteristic in the obese subjects is that when we look at the epithelium layer of the intestine, we had really accumulation of T lymphocyte and especially this type of cell, CD8 alpha beta. And we examined the association between these cells and obesity-related complication, and we saw some association. We also observe that if we take the lamina propria from the intestine and look at the intestine function on different models, there is great perturbation of especially glucose handling and response to insulin. So basically, again, low-grade inflammation is key, and this also affects the intestine tissue. And probably there is an issue about the interplay between the gut microbiota and immunity, change of immunity in the intestine. Okay, so coming back to patient, again, in this clinical assembly, you know that basically we are seeing patients from a clinical situation, then they gain and lose weight, and there is this so-called yo-yo system. They reach obesity, and then with time it's more and more difficult to lose weight, and they relapse. But we know also that there are different types of patients, different clinical trajectories, and to some extent, resistance to weight loss with time. So these are many questions that seems to some extent simple, but that's difficult to approach or to understand. Which are the key mechanisms of fat mass expansion? Why is it so easy to gain and so difficult to lose weight? Why some subjects will develop comorbidities? And in the future, can we adapt so-called personalized treatment? So first, I want to come back on this first step here, which is weight gain. And again, I was mentioning in the introduction the fact that there has been many approaches trying to understand the genetic cause of obesity. And one pathway was several pathways, but one was particularly targeted, which is the leptin-melanocortin pathway. And we understand now better this system, and just to recall you that leptin was identified in 1994, and basically what leptin is doing is that it stimulates POMC neuron you see here, and then with this neuron are stimulated, there are factors like melanocortin 4 receptor ligand that, when activated, diminish food intake and increase energy expenditure, while leptin inhibits neuropeptide wide. Why I'm telling you that? Because I think that one of the major success of the genetic approach in case of severe obesity was the identification of individuals like this boy here with rapid weight gain at after birth. And these patients have basically mutation of the leptin-melanocortin pathway. So this leads to severe obesity, food intake, seeking behavior, really food impulsivity, and endocrine dysfunction. And after 20 years now, the first mutation were identified, 20 years ago, we have treatment for this patient. So and especially it's an agonist of the melanocortin-4 receptor. You can see here, that's a peptide that you could inject. But it's limited to this rare care of obesity, rare syndromes with patients having mutation upstream leptin and downstream leptin, downstream melanocortin-4 receptor, and upstream leptin. Okay, so but what about common form of obesity? And again, you know that many of the drugs that basically act in the brain failed because there was secondary effect. And as in many other situations, there are many genes involved in the susceptibility of obesity, but for now, none of them had led to a novel pharmacological component. Okay, so in this context, as I was mentioning, in the last 10 years, there has been huge amount of data suggesting that actually the bacteria in our gut could play a role in body weight regulation and also is in obesity-related complication. And it started with many mouse studies, and I just show you this one, which is a very famous study, where basically you take a fecal sample, full stool sample from an obese individual and from a lean one, and you do a microbiota transplant in a recipient mouse without germ. So it's germ-free mice. And when you look at the mice progression in weight, you will see that this red one will increase adiposity, while this other one just won't develop obesity. But the very interesting further experiments in this one was basically that the researcher took those mice and put them together in the same cage. So what happened? The mice are coprophagic, so they are going to share their gut microbiota. And what they observe is that basically these red mice here would improve their metabolic condition. So the researcher conclude, well, obesity can be transmitted by fecal microbiota transfer, and you can see an improvement if you basically have together gut microbiota from this obese mice here and the lean one. So there is some degree of improvement. This worked, however, in one condition, and this is something very important, is that this worked, the transfer of the phenotype worked only if mice were receiving a low-fat, high-fiber diet. What I'm trying to say here is that if they are fed by high-fat diet, you won't see an amelioration. So food matters, and again, I will come back on that. By the way, when we say obesity transfer, when you look carefully on all these studies, it's a susceptibility to weight gain. You basically never transmit the obese phenotype, and just that's something we need to keep in mind. Okay, so we say that obesity, diabetes are non-communicable disease, but is it really non-communicable disease if you can transfer at least some part of the obese phenotype by germs, and in that case, gut microbiota. Okay, so what are the concepts? The concepts are all about, of course, modification, I'll come back on that again, modification of the composition, fermentation, increased energy harvest. And I start my talk telling you about low-grade inflammation in different tissues, and basically what is now currently discussed is that, indeed, in obese condition, there is modification in the gut microbiota composition, in gene richness, and the role of specific bacterial group. So why do we know that now? Because we are able to use sequencing approach to get information about this enormous world of bacterial genome. And we can also derive from this sequencing approach knowledge about bacterial metabolites. Basically, with bioinformatic approaches, knowing the genes, you can also predict the function. But also, you can measure some gut-derived metabolites. And also, what is currently proposed is that bacteria synthesize many of these short-chain fatty acids, as well as some metabolites that could contribute to the host, to change of the host biology. Something also very important is bacterial component, and especially lipopolysaccharide. So basically, some of the bacteria, gram-negative, will produce this lipopolysaccharide, which will contribute to a pro-inflammatory condition. And again, and this was also shown by animal models, will contribute to accumulation of macrophages in the adipose tissue. So then, again, one of the concepts is that this leads to change in energy harvesting, increase, and that could modify metabolism and increase risk of chronic disease. But also very important is the contribution of low-grade inflammation in the susceptibility in the development of insulin resistance and chronic disease. So basically a little word about this metabolite, which is also very famous in the field. So when you eat a food rich in red meat and fat, your bacteria will love that. They will produce a gas which is called TMA, trimethylamine. This gas will go to the liver, and basically the liver will synthesize this molecule here, trimethylamine oxide. And what was shown is that trimethylamine oxide, and that's especially done by Stan Hazen in US, is that the fact that this will contribute to the development of cardiovascular plaque. And there are now some development on this pathway, and especially some drug that could counteract the synthesis of TMAO. But this is one of the famous metabolites, and this is also highly discussed currently. Okay, so these are the concepts. Another one that will, again, tells you about periodontitis. So you know that in our patient with diabetes, patient with cardiovascular disease, we give lots of recommendations about teeth and especially to avoid periodontitis because it's known as a risk factor for diabetes and cardiovascular risk. Again, there are many active research in this field, and especially looking at the buccal microbiota and with some germ being associated with the development of atherosclerosis. Okay, so what are the players? So the players are short-chain fatty acid, basically based on fermentation of dietary fibers, secondary bile acids, branched-chain amino acids, very important and can be produced by bacteria, which associate with insulin resistance, and some of gut-derived metabolites, such as TMAO, I just told you about. So these gut-derived metabolites from diets may play a key role in the regulation of host metabolism. Okay, but we are doctors. So can the microbiome be a treatment for human disease? So in that case, we might ask for who, what, to some extent why, where, and when. So for who, Well, we all know that these patients have a heterogeneity in the phenotype, and if we take obesity, there are discussions about phenotype and whether at some stage some patients are at a healthy stage of obesity. So can we act early in the process acting on gut microbiota? Second, what? And many factors, I will show you some of them, act actually on the gut microbiota. Of course, food, pre-probiotics, metabolites, fecal transfer, combination of those. Why, for which objective, where to act, are we going to act directly on the gut microbiome, the gut barrier, derived molecule, host targets, and combine. I told you a lot about low-grade inflammation. So then do we have to act both on the gut microbiota and low-grade inflammation in a combined way, eventually to avoid complication? And when? Is it also a prevention action? What about patient trajectories and stage of progression? And I will illustrate some of them. First, again, there are many types of obesity, different phenotype in people living in different backgrounds. And I try to show you with the pictures on the adipose tissue. We know it's not only a matter of body mass index, it's also a matter of body fat distribution and also tissue disease. And this could be involved in different response to treatment and importance of therapies. So then, can gut microbiota help, knowledge on gut microbiota help in patient stratification, in understanding some aspect of the complex pathophysiology and in targeted treatment? So first, the richness. And that was one of the discoveries in the last 5 to 6 years, is the fact that if you sequence the bacterial genome, you can calculate the amount of genes. So there are basically individuals with low bacterial richness and others with high bacterial richness. And here it's mentioned low gene count, high gene count. And then if you look at overweight, obese individuals, you will see that with the progression of obesity, the amount of individuals with low bacterial richness, so low gene count here, increase. So here it's overweight, here and here obese population. And look here, in severe obesity, that's basically patient for candidate for bariatric surgery, about more than 70% of them have decreased gut microbiome richness. And this is here the same number of genes, so the same threshold. And why is it important? So, well, low gene richness prevalence increase with obesity severity. So why it's important? Because when basically in clinical study you compare individuals with low richness and high richness, you will see a difference. So first you will see a difference in the gut microbiota composition, and you have a change in the balance in the bacteria, with low gene richness individuals having an increase of pro-inflammatory bacteria, while high richness individuals, we have an increase of anti-inflammatory bacteria. What about the clinical situation? Again, if you look, whatever you look, obese, overweight individuals or individuals with severe obesity, you will see that individuals with low gene count, so low bacterial richness, will have increased dyslipidemia, adiposity, insulin resistance, and low-grade inflammation. But these patients can be treated a lot by medication, and there is issues about polypharmacy. And this is the case for type 2 diabetes, for example. It has been shown and also confirmed in several studies that if you use metformin, for example, which is the first line of treatment, you have modification of the gut microbiota profile. And it was even subject that some of the effect of metformin could be via modification of the gut microbiota, and this is highly discussed in the field now. Okay, so manipulating the gut microbiota. There are many ways to do that. Of course, the diet. Gut microbiota transfer, if you have questions, I can do it. Pre-probiotics. And when you look at patients before and after bariatric surgery, you have huge modification of the gut microbiota. And again, using the gut microbiota transfer, basically you take fecal samples from individuals after bariatric surgery, you can transfer some of the metabolic effects induced by bariatric surgery. Okay, dietetic. Well, it's complex because if you look at food intake, you will see that the bacteria are able to do a lot of things. First, for their own need, right? So basically, there is carbohydrate fermentation, protein fermentation, production of short-chain fatty acid I told you about. And many of these factors will have either positive regulator or negative regulator of metabolism, and especially insulin sensitivity. Second, there are also many discussions about the intestine barrier and what is so-called the leaky gut in metabolic disease. Again, there are many data in mouse models. In human obesity and type 2 diabetes, this leaky gut concept, I mean, in human, is not so clear. And also the contribution of immunity, and we need to see that as really a bidirectional interaction. So diet, host metabolism, and inflammation matter. So what about food? Barely all components of food impact on the gut microbiota, and there are many studies showing the impact of different types of diet, vegetarian diet, and so on, that do impact on the gut microbiota. But also toxics in food, and especially organic pollutants, emulsifier, and so on, have huge impact not only on the composition of the gut microbiota, but also on the distance between the mucus and the intestine. And another very important aspect is that the dietary effect is really rapid. And basically, if you change to a plant-based diet to an animal-based diet, you will rapidly see some switches and rapid changes. Okay, so we had the opportunity to do some years ago a study. It was at the beginning a pilot study where we had a calorie restriction, obese overweight patient, and they received high fiber protein diet with low carbohydrate index. So what happened, and this scheme seems simple, but it tells you a lot, is that basically individuals who had a low bacterial amount were able to increase by around 30% gut bacterial richness 6 weeks after this dietary intervention. But it was not enough to reach the gut bacterial richness observed in high gene count individuals. So we are able to modify the gut microbiota, but in that case, it was maybe too short to reach the level of individuals with high gene count. And one of the consequences, and if you follow low gene count individuals, they are in white here, you see 6 weeks, 12 weeks, is that they, of course, improve their metabolic indexes, but again, it was less improvement than was with high gene richness from the beginning. So, yeah, so we are able to increase gut microbiota richness and diversity. Another example I wanted to show you is also about pre-probiotics. So you may know that, I think that in the world there are like 300,000 brands of pre-probiotics. And basically with lots of marketing, but no clear effect because we are missing some very good studies in this field. And then it's coming what's so-called probiotics of third generation. And I will finish by showing you one example of that, which is, and this bacteria is very interesting. It's called Akkermansia muciniphylla, and it's located in the mucus. And what was shown, and this was done by Patrice Calny in Belgium, so basically what Patrice did was to take Akkermansia muciniphylla and to give this probiotic to mice, and you have decreased fat mass, decreased fasting glucose, and improved low-grade inflammation, and they have also improvement of the gut barrier. Even identify in the membrane a protein that basically mimic some of the metabolic improvement that was observed with the bacteria. So what we've done together with Patrice is that we came back to our patient, and basically we observed that there are patients with, again, high akkermansia and those with low akkermansia. And when you look at the clinical variables, you can see, well, that some with a higher abundance of akkermansia have more or less a better metabolic profile with diminished BMI, a waist-hip ratio, a diminished liver transaminase, and a better glucose tolerance. But the point I wanted to make is that finally I told you about gut microbiota richness, and I told you about some of these bacteria, star bacteria, if you want, there are others. So what about the combination of Akkermansia muciniphylla and the overall profile? If you do that, and you can do that clinical study, you can basically combine those individuals with high or low Akkermansia and those with high or low richness. Basically, those having the better metabolic profile were those combining high richness and high Akkermansia in this study. So I'm telling you that because when you do this complex metagenomic data, basically when you look at networks, if you want, it's like social networks. Akkermansia muciniphylla has bacteria in this environment which are good friends and other not so good friends. And what you get here is different bacterial species associated with Akkermansia muciniphylla during this dietary intervention. What I'm trying to say here is that Akkermansia is not alone, and probably we need to take the overall ecosystem into account. And so this might impact the effect of this third generation probiotic in the future, because that's complex ecosystem. Okay, so then to finish that, I won't call about gut microbiota, just to finish. We all know that we see patients with different environments, and especially in the nutrition field, diet, exercise, inherent factors, pathologies. And now there is a new actor in the scene. And it's really going very fast. I mean, in the near future, we'll have markers about low and high diversity. We had ideas about the abundance of certain species. We have gut-derived metabolites. I told you about TMA, TMO. We know that this different type of intervention modulate the gut microbiota. And I just cited some of them: weight modification, next generation, probiotics, and so on. And there are effects in mice, and in human, there are some predicted effects, which are switch in the microbiome ecosystem, change in diversity, abundance in certain metabolites, change in metabolic concentration, and so on. But for the patient, the issue is, okay, can we decrease endotoxemia, improve metabolism, insulin sensitivity, improve immune response, and reduce some complication? The problem is that there is a missing arrow here, is that we don't have, it's just a field which is started, and we don't have, again, we still to work on this link between predicted effect and real expected effect for the patient. Okay, I'm going to stop here. I want to tell, that's my team, and I want to tell that in this field, it's complex. We need to work, of course, with physicians, people involved in metabolism, but also people able to treat this large amount of data. Just to give you an idea, the gut microbiota, that's the microbiome, that's 10 million genes. So you can imagine that with 10 million genes, you need people treating the data, and also many collaborators worldwide, as well as European projects. Okay, thank you, and I'll be happy to take questions.